Here's a political fact emerging in these first 70 days of the Biden presidency. Joe Biden's begun his presidency on a more liberal footing than the last two Democratic presidents, which makes this the most progressive start to any presidency in the past 40 years. Biden's now pushing for a cumulative $4 trillion in total spending there in his first 100 days, getting a liberal boost from this news that Senate Democrats can bypass McConnell's obstruction for party line votes on this new infrastructure bill. Liberals are encouraged. Conservatives are aghast. And many Democrats who know Joe Biden are struck by how he's evolving in this role and in this tough time for the nation, a contrast to a Senate career where he was, by his own words, a centrist or even conservative Democrat on many different issues.
More cops, more prisons, more physical protection for the people. We have predators on our streets. You must take back the streets.
Congress gives President Bush what he wants in the showdown with Saddam Hussein by a vote of 77-23.
We say, yes, Mr. President, you have that power to go to war.
When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid.
He meant Medicare and Medicaid. He meant Iraq. He meant clean up the streets with that tough and controversial crime bill. Now, that was then, in Joe Biden's long Senate career. And then we know recently that party that he's in seemed to sort of split two presidential cycles in a row between the more establishment centrist choice and a progressive one. First, it was Clinton versus Sanders, and then it was Biden versus Sanders. At this time a year ago, Sanders had not yet endorsed Biden, and they'd been engaging in months of respectful but vigorous policy debate.
Joe has voted for terrible trade agreements.
I don't know that there's any trade agreement that the senator would ever think made any sense.
Joe and I have a fundamental disagreement here, in case you haven't noticed. Obviously, the Paris Accord is useful, but it doesn't go anywhere. If you laugh at Joe, then you're missing the point. This is an existential crisis.
About a year later, Biden's governing from the core and base of the Democratic Party, the progressive base, pushing the liberal plans I just mentioned, spending that outstrips anything from the early days of the Obama-Biden administration, pushing higher taxes on the wealthy and on corporations, and Joe Biden taking sides with labor more than he did in past decades or than past Democratic presidents. He's pushing the new multi-trillion-dollar plan with major planks for jobs, racial justice, and addressing climate change. Now, whether it's correlation or causation, Biden at times can sound a bit like the new Bernie.
We need a lot more, and that's true for the other 49 states. China is building high-speed rail all over the place. We are not.
We have to improve our infrastructure. China and other countries are eating our lunch.
Is Biden simply revealing his own values now that he has this power? Or is he channeling Sanders? An Obama campaign veteran and beat guest, Che Komanduri, says it shows the new era of progressive politics that's much closer to Bernie Sanders' vision of radically distributing America's wealth downwards. And that doesn't mean Biden has gone full Democratic socialist. Sanders himself wants more direct climate action in that new Biden bill. And Biden has not been with liberals on a larger plan to wipe out student debt up to $50,000 or go to the mat fully on minimum wage in the Senate. But as Komanduri argues, and as some liberals have been arguing for years, the Democratic Party's base is fundamentally progressive on economic justice. And that base, with its coalition, is larger than the MAGA movement. And the new President Biden increasingly sounds like he gets that, which means he sounds more like the party's progressives than, say, Joe Biden from the 90s.
CEOs make millions and millions of dollars, but don't ask us to pay more in taxes.
When a multinational corporation that builds a factory abroad, brings it home and sells it, they pay nothing at all.
If elected president of the United States, we're going to do everything that we can to rebuild the trade union movement in this country.
I'm a union guy. I support unions. Unions built the middle class. It's about time they start to get a piece of the action.
That brings us to the deep dive political conversations we do around here on a special day that we call Che Day, with political strategist Che Komanduri, who's worked on 3 presidential campaigns and to whom we are indebted for some of those points that we just explored. Good to have you back, sir.
Thank you for having me, Ari.
People know it's Che Day from the music and the cartoon. As mentioned,
now. That's very cool.
See, yeah, you see an overlap here between these two people. Explain.
Yeah, I mean, look, when the campaign last year, the Biden campaign, was saying that Biden was going to pattern himself after FDR and LBJ, to be honest, I just thought it was campaign spin. I thought they were just putting that out there to get disaffected progressives more on board with Biden. After all, Biden, as you pointed out, is an institutionalist. He is a centrist Democratic senator who did represent the credit card industry and the banks quite ably in the U.S. Senate when he was a senator from Delaware. So, of course, I never thought that he would be the next FDR or the next LBJ. However, here we are. And we have historic investments in the working class, in children. I mean, think about the fact that we're going to cut child poverty in half as a result of this stimulus. We're having an investment in the K through 12 system and children's schools and child care and even child health care as a result of what Biden is doing with the stimulus and with infrastructure. How do we get here? There's really two reasons. One is that Biden, who is not the doddering sort of old man that Fox makes him out to be, is actually proving himself to be a very agile and acute observer of politics. He understands where the country has been, where it's going, and how the Obama-Clinton sort of pathway didn't really work for the Democratic Party very well. The second, I would say, is Bernie Sanders. I think it's very fair to say that Bernie Sanders is one of the most consequential losers in presidential history. In politics, sometimes you can win by losing. And I think in many ways, Bernie has done that. His campaign, and I would put it on a very short list, I would put it with Howard Dean's 2004 campaign, which revolutionized the internet and grassroots fundraising, and Barry Goldwater's campaign, most importantly. And I think that's the best example of where Bernie Sanders' campaign sort of is going to end up historically looking. Barry Goldwater lost the battle in the 60s, but he ended up winning the war by the 1980s. Bernie Sanders, in a much quicker timeline, appears to have done exactly the same thing.
As an analyst of politics and someone who's worked in it, how do you differ between whether Biden is channeling Bernie or Biden is channeling where most Democrats are after everything we've been through as a country? I think it's a combination of the two. I think Biden saw that what President Clinton did and what President Obama did, which is that they viewed corporations and they wanted to work cooperatively with corporations. They didn't view corporations necessarily as the enemy. They wanted to work cooperatively with them to get better outcomes for workers. Bernie, because quite frankly, he was never a mainstream Democrat, he actually wasn't a Democrat at all, he actually quite clearly saw the corporations are in the business of making money. And no matter what they say about helping people, they really aren't about creating better outcomes for their workers. They're about improving their own bottom line. I think Bernie very clearly saw that. I think Biden recognizes that Bernie was probably right about that, hence the corporate tax increases, hence the discussions now about very large tax increases on the rich and the upper class in the United States. I think that's a factor. The second thing I would say about Bernie that's kind of important to keep in mind is if you look at historically, there was a presidential candidate by the name of Norman Thomas, who was a socialist candidate, ran 5 times for the American presidency. And he was once asked at the end of his life in the 1960s, what was the greatest accomplishment of his career? And he said, the intellectual theft of all my ideas by the Democratic Party. I think you can say very much the same thing about Bernie Sanders. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.